afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this kickoff of the Women in Global Development Leadership Series. I'm so pleased to be here with my colleague, Kathy Ho.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kathy. I'm currently a Wild Network Fellow and one of the speakers for today's session. As a little bit of background on me, I'm a management consultant with both public and private sector experience, and I'm currently completing my MBA at Northwestern. As I see people are trickling in from the waiting room, just a couple housekeeping items. So we'd love to hear from you guys, who you are and where you're joining from all around the globe. So if you want to enter that information into the Q&A box, it'll be great to see who's with us today. And then additionally, if you do have a question, please do post that in the Q&A box as well. Any Q&A that we don't get to during today's session, Wild will follow up with. And then finally, if you're engaged and interested in the session, feel free to tweet at us using hashtag #BeWild2020.
Awesome. So greetings, everyone. Again, I'm Fiona Macaulay, the founder and CEO of the Wild Network. And this is, wow, this is awesome. Love to see where everyone is letting us know that they're coming in from. You'll see me looking to the side because I have a second screen here. So we see Jill Chow from Falls Church, Virginia. We also have Norma from the Washington area, Carrie, Denisa from Kenya. I see we have someone joining us from Thailand. Okay, thanks for joining us. I know it's late at night for you from Vermont. Megan from Vermont. Nigeria, welcome. We're so glad that you're with us. This is really exciting. So keep those introductions going. Would love to know who's with us. So as you may know, the third global Women in Global Development Leadership Forum was supposed to take place live here in Washington, D.C., where I'm standing this week. This event was going to be tomorrow. It was going to be a conference with 400 women and men, and it was going to be our third edition of the live event. March 11th was the last day that I worked in person with the Wild team. And at that time, we were discussing, whether our live forum was going to take place, whether we needed to make contingency plans. And I was saying, oh, I'm sure we're all going to be together on May 6th. And one of my colleagues, Jen, really put her hand on my arm and she said, Fiona, this event is not taking place live in DC. And so one of the upsides of being a social entrepreneur is that you've got a view of how to change the world and you have a belief that you can be a change maker, kind of helping to make that happen. So it means that you're a real optimist. But it also means that you need to have people around you who can also be the voice of reason. And because sheer optimism does not always carry the day, as we see that we are now joining here virtually today. But allow me to start by saying I'm just so grateful for my Wild colleagues who have been just such a fabulous team during this period, and also to my team who let me know early on that to keep our momentum going around all the work that we're all doing together around the globe to advance women's leadership in the global development sector, and the work that we're doing to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion, we knew we wanted to do something this week. And so we're thrilled that we've got this online series, and I'm really excited that you're here with us this morning, DC time. So since that time in early March, our lives and the lives of people in our communities, the communities where we work, have all been massively disruptive. And I know that some of us have faced real hardship, illness, medical issues, and loss. And I sincerely hope that you and your loved ones are safe. So like you, or like me, many of you have probably learned a lot in these recent weeks and have done a lot of adapting and innovating. I know that in my home, in the last 9 weeks or so, I've learned how to digest multiple emails from my children's different schools to discern what learning has to take place, and then with my husband to figure out how we're going to accomplish that. I've learned to make a plan with my husband each morning to decrease the chances that one of my children is going to come flying through the door of my home office when I'm speaking at a virtual conference. So just to let you know, that could happen at any moment despite our best laid plans. And I'm also learning new ways to take care of myself, to take care of others, and to take care of my work. And here at Wild, we've spent the last 3 months adapting and innovating as well. And this biggest adaptation that you're seeing is moving from the live to the online events. And as we make this adaptation, we've been anchored in our core commitment to social innovators and to the global development community. So we've got content going on throughout this week that we hope will support you and your organizations during this time of disruption. We hope it'll support you as you're thinking about how to be the strongest leader possible, and you're thinking about how your organization can be the most inclusive, strongest organization possible as well. So as many of you know, WILD supports women social innovators at all stages of their career to increase their influence and to scale the impact that they're having and that their organizations are having. Our goal is to build and connect the system of stakeholders that believe in building cultures of inclusive leadership. And we want your engagement with us and your engagement with each other to be a real joy. And here's how we do that. Firstly, we have a focus on actionable content that supports strong leaders to be even stronger and supports great organizations to be even greater. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. And what I teach my students is that adapting can be a tool to discover additional growth. Often it's ways to serve people in ways that you might have otherwise overlooked. And that is definitely true for us at WILD. Because this week, while our live forum that would have taken place this week would have had about 400 people from about 6 to 10 countries. This week, we have 1,200 people signed up from 30 different countries to participate in these online sessions. So a major silver lining for us as we're adapting is that we're reaching 3 times as many people in the WILD community who can benefit from the rich content, tools, and transferable learning that all our speakers are bringing this week. And we're having this much broader global reach, especially reaching people in the global South. So for those of you who have joined us from the global South, just an extra warm welcome, and we're so glad that you're participating. Another silver lining for us has been that we have had some time to innovate. That means that we've been taking on some new challenges and also making some changes to some existing initiatives. So as you know, WILD supports women leaders to scale the impact of their work. And we also feel it's really important is to thrive personally. So leadership coaching has been shown to do that. The Institute of Coaching has found that over 70% of individuals who receive coaching benefit from improved work performance, relationships, and more effective communication skills. And leaders who receive leadership coaching report that they had an increase in their level of self-awareness, that they feel more self-confident, and that this is coupled with a decrease in self-limiting thoughts and beliefs. People who've been coached report increased ability to lead themselves with greater compassion and self-acceptance. And also they report that 86% of companies feel that they have recouped the investment that they have put into leadership coaching for their employees. My own experience of leadership coaching took place about 15 years ago. At that time, I was the CEO of the first social enterprise that I founded in the late 90s. And that organization, we had been doing work building capacity of organizations to have do greater amounts of economic development in the communities that they worked in. And the company was hovering around just under $1 million US in annual revenues, just to give you a size of our scope. And I was sitting in a meeting and I was actually at the Inter-American Development Bank, and I heard some of the other meeting participants talk about how there was an initiative to help women entrepreneurs in the US. And it was called the Make Man $1 Million Business Program. And the reason that that initiative had been started was that men and women in America start businesses at equal rates. When you look at which companies are taking their annual revenues over $1 million annually, it was less than 1% of those people were women. So women and men starting business at equal rates, but only this tiny fraction of those business owners were actually breaking the $1 million in annual revenue mark. And when I heard that there was a program that wanted to support growth-oriented women entrepreneurs, that wanted to provide like a package of services that would help them to be more effective, to be able to scale their impact, I thought, this is for me. And I was fortunate to be able to win that pitch competition and to get a package of services. And far and away, the most important thing that I received was the leadership coaching. And all those stats that I just read out about how leadership coaching is reported to help people, all of that applies to me at that time. And so, within a year, my company was over $1 million in annual revenues. And perhaps most importantly, there had been something I really wanted to do, which was to help the global community of organizations working to help young people get ahead economically. I really had a vision for how I could help to formalize that sector to ensure that the resources, the programs, the research being done to support young people to have greater economic opportunity, that money could be better spent, that people could do more effective work faster. And so that coaching really led me on to take the step to start that global network, which went on to have a significant impact. So I exited that company a few years ago, but that memory of how leadership coaching really stays with me. And so when I founded Wild 3 years ago, I always had in the back of my mind, could I be someone who helped to scale the availability of leadership coaching for women who are working with social purpose? So with that said, I am thrilled to say that during this period of upheaval, one of the innovations that Wild has been able to take forward in partnership with a wonderful organization called Ethical Coach is that we are offering a 6-month coaching engagement to 30 members of the Wild Network. We invited entrepreneurs, that is people within their company working to make change around women's leadership, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We invited social entrepreneurs from around the world working on these issues to apply for one of these 30 places. And we got applications from across the globe. It was so much fun to go through and see the incredible work that our female colleagues are doing around the world to support women's leadership, to support equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we have selected these 30 organizations. So we're really excited to kind of do the big reveal to you today at this kickoff of the organizations around the globe who have a staff member who are a social entrepreneur, a founder of a social enterprise, who are going to be receiving this leadership coaching. All of the coachees in this initiative have graciously agreed to participate in this research initiative, because all that data that I shared earlier is generalized data about people who've received leadership coaching. As far as I know, we don't have specific data about how women's social innovators can benefit from leadership coaching. So we're going to be running this action research project alongside the coaching that the coachees are going to receive, to be able to surface some data for our own sector to reflect on. And we'll see what the results are. And we look forward to sharing some of those results out at our global forum, which will take place October 26th in a virtual setting. So we are pretty excited. Wild and Ethical Coach are pretty excited about the coachees that we have. We're also excited about the coaches who are involved, who are from around the globe. So allow me to extend a special thanks to all these coaches from around the globe who are supporting women's leadership, who are supporting EDI, and who are bringing their time and talent to this project. If, as I'm talking here today about leadership coaching and the benefits and who's participating, if any of this is striking a chord inside you and you think, I'd like to learn more about this, or you think, I'd like to apply, we invite you to go to our page on the wildleadershipforum.org. You'll see a page there on coaching, and you're welcome to register your interest. And that way, when the applications open up for cohort 2, which Ethical Coach and Wild think we'll do in about August 2020, we will notify you so that you can consider if you want to put an application in. And that same web page has also has a great video that Wild and Ethical Coach shot about a month ago, just with women talking about from our sector, talking about how leadership coaching has benefited them. So stay tuned for more on that. In this period of innovation, it has also given a moment for us to reflect on what we have learned about the impact that Wild has had, and specifically what the impact has been of the Women in Global Development Leadership Forum over the preceding 2 years. And we have had this chance to sort of synthesize, to go and speak to many of our stakeholders, to ask them what have the outcomes been for them. So the kinds of questions we asked are here on the screen. After attending the forum, what were your biggest takeaways or aha moments? What new goals did the forum provide either for yourself or for your organization? How has the forum changed or motivated you to promote gender equity, either for yourself or at your organization? So perhaps like me, you're curious, like how, what kind of inspiration tools did women and men benefit when this information was sort of packaged and curated for them in a very intentional way? Well, here's some of the outcomes that we have learned about. One person reported that she used the information from the forum to achieve leadership buy-in to conduct a gender audit from the leadership buy-in across the board, leadership teams, and all of their offices, both headquarters and project offices. So this is a major undertaking because this person, and actually we know a couple of people who have taken this internal leadership role in advocating for a gender audit. And the kind of data that is going to be surfaced from this is things like how many women and men are at each level of the organization, how does their pay stack up against one another, how does the overall distribution of pay compare between women and men. The gender audit also takes into account questions of intersectionality. So also looking at women of which ethnicity, how's their, what positions do they have in the organization, the kind of influence that they have, and so on. So we think this is really exciting, and we're actually going to be having a very in-depth session on the nuts and bolts of gender audits at our October 26th online forum. So if you're interested, that would definitely be something to check out. We had another attendee report that at her quarterly review after the forum, she leveraged the toolkit provided in the salary negotiation training session to advocate for a raise, successfully advocate for a raise because she got that. And obviously, like, we love hearing those outcomes. Organizations have such an important role to play around equity. And as individuals, we also still have a strong role to play in advocating for ourselves. So we love hearing feedback like that. Another outcome we know of is that a group of women and men who attended the WILD Forum in 2019 from the same company, they went back to their leadership and recommended to institute a women's affinity group, which today is fully up and running. So like, bravo, we know how important affinity groups are, also known as employee research groups, can be to organizations, and the success of those organizations and the people who work there. And then the final outcome I wanted to share is that we have a senior executive who reported that the forum emboldened her to speak out to serve as a stronger advocate for gender equity, including counseling women to negotiate salary increases and pushing senior managers around the business case for diversity. So that's exciting. We love hearing that sort of entrepreneurial change-making actions, and we're just so pleased that sometimes being in a community of like-minded people can help to bring out what is already within us. In that same story that I mentioned from myself 15 years ago, and often up to probably weekly, it makes a big difference to me to be amongst like-minded people. Often that's helping me to take forward initiatives that I know to be important, but sometimes I just need to know others think they're important too. So I'm excited to share some of those results, because that was definitely probably even a greater impact than I could have hoped for when, along with many, many partners, we launched the first WILD Forum in 2018. So as we look towards the future, some of the questions that we started asking ourselves at the start of this year, at the start of 2020, is how can we build on this momentum of those kinds of outcomes? How can we accelerate the momentum of these kinds of outcomes? And how can we continue to add value to our stakeholders in the greater Washington, D.C. area, as well as around the world in additional ways? So this set us on a journey to develop a gender equity framework to be used by WILD. Internally, this gender equity framework is going to serve as the foundation of all of WILD's programs. So we're going to use it to review our programming, to identify any gaps that we might have to fill in what we're doing, and to ensure that things that we're doing that are important, that we continue doing. And ultimately, what we're going to do is categorize all our future programming along this gender equity framework to orient everything we do along the key levers to promote women's advancement in the global development sector. So as I mentioned, we developed this to be an internal document, but because really all of our work is so external facing, and that we serve as a network and platform to shine a spotlight on others' great work and to connect people around the world who are doing important work, we wanted to share it very publicly in this way. And we also wanted to make a very wholehearted ask for your feedback on this on this framework. And when you see the framework, if you think it could be useful to you or your organization, you're welcome to change it, take it, adapt it, build on it, and we'd love to continue to learn from and with you. So, you know, please feel free to share back with us like how you might be able to lever it for your own work. So I'm excited to give you this first look at our gender equity framework. And in just a moment, I'm going to invite Kathy to lead you through the framework, which she has taken the lead on developing for us. So as you're listening to what Kathy shares, as she gives you if she runs you through the framework, I would ask you to consider what resonates with you. What's missing? What could be improved? This is really a beta version, and we'll use your input to improve it. And therefore, any feedback you give us will flow through to the offerings that we provide to you and others in the global development sector. And in the chat box, we're posting a link right now that can take you to a copy of the Gender Equity Framework. It's posted on LinkedIn, and we would love to receive your comments there as well. Okay, awesome. So let me pass off to you, Kathy. And just in doing this, let me just say how grateful I am for your commitment to inclusion, how appreciative I am with your comfort around innovation, and how much I appreciate your curiosity as you have scanned many gender equity frameworks out there to see which components would make the most sense for WILD and how to strengthen our offering to our stakeholders. So Kathy, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. It's been so much fun to be working with you over the past few months. So before diving into the gender equity framework itself, I really wanted to align everyone on some of the core tenets that were bubbling up throughout the development of the gender equity framework. We really envisioned this tool to be practical, adaptable, and sector specific to the global development sector in which we at WILD serve today. In terms of practical, when WILD thinks about gender equity, we think about both what needs to be done, but also how to do it. And we want the strategies that we convene around to be practical and for individuals and organizations to understand exactly what they need to do in order to drive meaningful change. In terms of adaptable, we believe that the gender equity framework and the work that WILD convenes around can fit the needs of your gender equity mission, no matter where you sit along this journey. Whether you just started talking about gender equity yesterday, or whether you've been talking about this for the past 50 years and you're a pioneer in this space. And then finally, sector specific. We think it's really important that the strategies and levers we convene around are positioned to address the unique challenges and great opportunities of the global development space to advance gender equity, both within our headquarters office, as well as the country and project offices that are served. So I'm really excited to preview to you guys the WILD Gender Equity Framework, which, as you can see here, there's 4 major themes that this encompasses. But to walk you through, I first want to draw your attention to the 2 dimensions that we're mapping along. So the first dimension is organizational change versus individual change. When we think about organizational change, we're really talking about strategies that address those systemic top-down interventions that can remove some of the overlaying systemic barriers that women face in the workplace and can promote gender equity by better equalizing the playing field. Now on individual change, there's been a lot of demand that WILD's heard within the industry about women wanting some individual leadership strategies that they can apply to embolden themselves to drive greater impact. So we're also convening around some of those individual tactics to be a stronger, braver leader. Now, the second dimension here is formal versus informal. Formal strategies really are those that can be directly implemented within an organization or within yourself so that the before and after is very clear. And you can see the change more immediately. Whereas when we're talking about some of the informal levers, here we're really discussing some of those professional growth tactics or mindset shifts, which may not be immediately noticeable from the before after, but really are incredibly critical in driving change. So I'll now walk you through step by step through each of these 4 quadrants here to give you a preview of what we're really convening around in each space. For example, organizational change, formal strategies, individual change that are informal, and so on. Starting with the organizational change, formal strategies. This is a really critical quadrant for WILD because we think there's so many systemic barriers that can be addressed by just including some diversity enabling infrastructure and mechanisms within organizations and enabling organizations with those structures, policies, and processes that are really beneficial in supporting gender equity across the headquarter offices, country offices, and project offices. So what we're really talking about here are some things that Fiona mentioned earlier, such as institutionalizing employee resource groups or women networks within your organization, leading in and adopting that gender audit or gender certification so that your organization can benchmark itself against some of their peers and how you're doing against gender equity, as well as creating some gender inclusive policies and procedures, such as flexible work time or some pretty generous parental leave policies. Moving on to the second quadrant, still focusing on organizational change, but more of those informal tactics. So creating a gender inclusive culture and practices within your organization. This is really critical as well for organizations to instill within themselves a sustainable commitment to gender equity, which can promote gender inclusive mindsets no matter what leadership is in charge and who are the employees in the organization. So what we're really thinking about here is how can an organization include, really promote that leadership commitment to gender equity and make it clear to all employees that this is a priority? How can an organization promote male allyship throughout the organization? Because men need to be included in the conversation as well and have a really strong influence in moving the needle along gender equity. And then smaller things, or not smaller things, but equally important things that need to be recognized are how can you change the mindset in terms of how to promote gender equity within the organization from being individual silos to recognizing intersectionality, as well as embedding pay equity as just a natural instinct within an organization. These practices are really important because they will create a more inclusive culture. Women will feel more involved and recognized within their organization. There will be lower turnover, and then this will just have a positive reinforcing cycle as you see more and more women at higher positions within the organization and increasing advocates for gender equity. Now, moving on to the individual change quadrants. So this one here is really focused on some of those informal levers as well to drive your individual leadership and power within yourself. So here what WILD's really convening around is how can they instill in women some of the skills and confidence needed to drive greater impact within their professional careers in the global development space. So this is an area that we've really heard that demand from women, that they really appreciate the effective communication sessions that we promote, as well as the self-branding and gaining influence talks, and some important tips about how to career plan to incorporate both information about where you want to be in your personal and professional lives. So these leadership skills are important in promoting gender equity because every single person, every single woman can take gender equity one step further by becoming a bolder, more confident leader. And then finally, on the individual change but formal side, WILD convenes around helping senior leaders and managers develop the intentional talent development strategies and tools to support women's development and growth within the workplace. So some of these involve some of that career planning and promotion discussions that I mentioned in the last quadrant, but instead equipping leaders and managers with the right tools and conversations to have so that they can effectively career plan with their teams. Additionally, promoting leadership coaching and sponsorship and mentorship within the organization so that these are opportunities that their teams, especially their women, know to take advantage of. I think one really important thing to note here too is that these individual change, like professional development strategies, are equally as important for women and men. Women and men alike can be strong leaders and advocates for their teams, for their organizations, and we believe that anyone can learn to be a more effective advocate for gender equity. So before moving on, Fiona, has there been any questions in the chat box that we want to address regarding the gender equity framework?
You know, there is. Actually, we have a great one from Karina. Karina, thanks so much for your comment. She writes, perhaps expanding beyond male allies to include other categories such as they, for example, to move from the receiving end and on to allies.
You know, that's a really great point, and we appreciate that feedback. Male allies is just one step along the way, and there are so many more inclusive ways that we can promote allyship throughout the organization. So really appreciate that comment.
Yep, that's the one that we have for now, but we warmly invite you know, anything that's coming up for you, you on the webinar, to just to share your comments. We really appreciate that. So here's another one from Michelle Holmes. Michelle, thanks for commenting. Love the gender equity framework. What are the thoughts on introducing representation targets at different organization levels as one of the formal change actions?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think right now we had listed the representation targets in the organizational change, but informal quadrant. But when you think about like whether this could be something that is more of a institutionalized target, it could be thought of one of those formal strategies that fit within the overarching D&I strategies that can be applied to both headquarters and operationalized amongst the both project and country offices. So appreciate that point.
Yeah, great point. And, you know, Kathy, that raises for me, when we were in the process of, you know, developing the framework, we often were like, you know, should this belong in the formal or the informal, right? We had a lot of discussion around that. And so like your comment, Michelle, is very helpful in helping us to sort of see, did we get it in the right quadrant? Also in probably making sure that when we're communicating about the framework that we acknowledge up front that there may not be a perfect location, and sometimes the location is in both places. So good food for thought. Thanks a lot. And then Danielle Bailey asks, thoughts on the importance of opening up ERGs, employee resources groups, to allies.
I think that's incredibly critical, opening up the employee resource groups to allies. One of the most effective ways to promote an employee resource group within an organization and make it the most like useful network for people is to have an executive sponsor that is not a part of that affinity group itself. So including both allies as executive sponsors as well as embedded in the resource group itself, for example, as a ambassador within the organization, is extremely helpful. And then, of course, there's also the question around intersectionality and creating those specific ERGs that can target those unique considerations as well.
Yep. Okay, awesome. So I'm just looking at the time, Kathy, just like I'll just take maybe one or two more questions.
Okay.
Question from Payal: why wouldn't pay equity be considered a formal strategy / lever?
I think same answer goes to the like equal representation point. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking about pay equity more as one of those mindset shifts for managers. But realistically, if it is embedded as a target or like mandated measure, then this pay equity piece could indeed be a formal organizational strategy, similarly along the lines of D&I, the like broader D&I strategy. So appreciate that point. And I think, as Fiona mentioned earlier, we will be doing some rejiggering of where the levers fit within the quadrants based on this really helpful feedback that we're receiving today.
Okay, fantastic. We have some excellent comments here. So I'll get maybe one or two, and then we can also circle back. So please keep your questions coming, because we'll also have time to circle back later in this webinar to take some more. And any we don't answer, just know that we are capturing them all, and we will still take them into account for the framework as we refine it, and also look for other ways to respond between now and the October 26th Women Global Development Leadership Forum. So it says, how can you incorporate timelines, short, mid, and long term, into the quadrants or risk? Easy, low-hanging fruit to more risk.
Ooh, that's a really interesting question, because I think the concept of timelines is important both for the framework, but also for where your individual organization sits within its gender equity like roadmap. So there are some changes that are more low-hanging fruit for one organization, but that could be a really big lift for another, depending on whether or not this is part of the culture and policies. So I think that's an interesting question, and kind of bucketing these interventions or strategies into where we think they could be actualized along the gender equity journey is a very useful next step for us to take.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And that question was from Lisa Loxman. Lisa, thanks for that. And that also gives me the idea is that one of the things that we are curating at the moment is about 50 different sessions that will now take place in an online conference on October 26th. And at that event, we're going to have lots and lots and lots of organizations sharing examples about the work that they're doing around advancing women's leadership and gender equity and equity, diversity, and inclusion more broadly. And so that gives me the idea that one of the things that we could do is asking each presenter who's sort of sharing that case study or that work that they're doing to sort of categorize it along that spectrum of what sort of could be something that could easily be executed in a quarter, what takes, is a bigger lift, what might be a multi-year effort. So thank you for getting the wheels turning on that. Okay, we have some more questions, so let's circle back to those in, a little bit later. So Kathy, back over to you.
Okay, great. So as Fiona just briefly introduced, as we look forward to the 2020 Women in Global Development Leadership Forum held on, I think, October 26th, we've been starting to think through how the sessions that have been curated there can map along this new gender equity framework, which has been a really useful exercise for us in identifying where the greatest emphasis has been placed thus far in terms of session curation, as well as where might there be some gaps. I'm not going to walk through all 50 of the sessions, but just to show what this looks like, the 2020 Women in Global Development Leadership Forum has three main components to its agenda. The first is, don't know what's happening here. It looks like the slides are moving along on their own. But pausing here again. Okay, great. So the first part of the agenda is the skills to lead at every level. So this really is addressing some of those individual change components that we talked about in the bottom two quadrants of the gender equity framework. The second theme is organizational development for greater inclusion and performance. As it says in the title, this is addressing some of those organizational change levers that we'll be discussing. And then the third is the sector-wide initiatives, which really is inclusive of, I think, all of the quadrants, but talking about where is the sector today, what's been accomplished, and how can every attendee be a part of the change. So moving towards the mapping, I'm just going to focus on one of the quadrants here, the diversity enabling infrastructure and mechanisms, but to show you how each of the sessions map. For the D&I strategy as a whole, we have two sessions right now, one focusing on the real or nitty gritty of D&I, and then the second being around how you in your organization can leverage the gender experts that you have to support the gender equity and D&I inclusion initiatives that you want to promote within your organization. We have one session now around employee resource groups, how to form them and how they're performing. I think this is a really useful session to talk about how you can get employee resource groups set up for yourself. We have one, sorry, I don't know why these keep moving, but we have one session around gender audits, gender equity certification. And here, this is, I think, a useful session that attaches back to some of the comments that we received in the Q&A box, because different organizations will talk about their process to getting gender equity certified, some of the challenges they face along the way, as well as what is the right approach for your individual organization, thinking through some of those time lifts as well as what is actually implementable. And then finally, we have two sessions oriented around gender inclusive policies and procedures. One here actually targeting disability inclusive development, which is an incredibly important tenet to consider as well. And then one talking more broadly along how to embed within the mission and vision, as well as in the internal policies and procedures, a gender equity focus. So here's just a preview for what's to come in October, and there are 45 or so other sessions which map to the remaining quadrants of the gender equity framework, which we're excited to get people involved in and your feedback on.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Kathy. And thanks everyone for keeping the comments going. So it was very interesting what Kathy just shared about applying the gender equity framework to the program that we had sort of spent the last 9 months or so developing for this year's annual forum. Again, it was going to be this week, but now it'll be in October. It was just sort of interesting to retrofit the 50 sessions that were on the program that had been selected in consultation, like just hundreds of conversations to understand what people in and outside of the global development sector, what initiatives they were taking, what tools they had, what research. You know, as the curator of that event, sort of all year, I just had my eyes and ears out for what would be the most relevant, cutting edge, transferable content that we can bring to our community every year. And that, speaking for myself, I had as sort of the head curator, that had largely been driven by all of these conversations and, you know, with various, you know, experts and actors and our stakeholders, a lot of reading and so on. But it was really, but we didn't have our own gender equity framework with which we were using, you know, which we now have. So it was interesting for me to retrofit all that session selection into our now framework. And what was, you know, was positive to see that we had all of our quadrants covered, but what I found is that we didn't have each element covered. So for example, in 2019, we had a big emphasis on male allies and allies in general. But you know, that content we really didn't, to date, hadn't queued up for the 2020 event. So this is just one of the ways that we're going to use it, because I see that some of the questions are around application, like how organizations should be considering this framework. And I think in that case, that's really for organizations to decide how they might want to use it. And as a note of clarification, this is how WILD is going to use, this is a tool that WILD is going to use so that we can do the best job possible at curating content for the global development sector. So on that note, we need, for October, we need content around allies and male allies. And so if you have expertise in this area, if there's a paper you've read, if there's a tool you know of, if you want to nominate a speaker or self-nominate yourself as a speaker, we would love to receive that information from you. And we'll have a link in the chat box for that nomination form. And as I say, please feel free to nominate someone else or self-nominate, or send any feedback to us that you think can help us to offer like a really high quality demand-driven event, because we want to make sure that we're covering kind of all the key elements each year. And we also found that we had a gap around sponsorship and mentorship. So again, if you want to nominate yourself or nominate someone else, or have other ideas for us for how we could do a great service to you and others on the content around sponsorship and mentorship, we would love to receive that. So I, you know, as I am committed to ensuring that WILD continues to be this positive force to promote women's leadership, diversity, and inclusion, we feel that there's a role that we can play in shining a spotlight on this topic. We're a community of really committed, dedicated, like hardworking individuals around the globe working on critical global development issues. And at the same time, we want to make sure that attention is also paid to our workplaces and to the opportunities that we have, because we feel like that's just the right thing writ large. We know that the business case is there for that. And we know that higher performing organizations have greater opportunities for women's advancement and have great EDI programs. So thanks a lot for all of these comments that you've given us, and we just love to keep the dialogue going. And now I just want to turn back to the questions, Kathy, because I think we have a couple more minutes to answer some of those. So let me bring a few more of those forward. And at the same time, Kathy, if there's any questions you identified that you want to bring up, with, you know, just want to have the door open to that as well.
That's great.
So Karina asks, will there be a common certification mechanism? So just maybe Karina, you can just write a note of clarification, but to answer that as best as I understand it right now, WILD is not a certifying organization, so that's not a lane that we're planning to get into. Something that we have done a good amount of research on the past 6 or 9 months is learning about the different organizations who do gender equity certifications and the different ways that organizations can become gender certified. So we have packaged a good amount of that information to be shared out at the larger forum in the fall. And we've done that, kind of connects to that earlier comment that we had from one of our participants. We've done that because we want to ensure that organizations who are interested in going down that road have information about, what the different kinds of resource requirements, what the different opportunities are in getting certified from different sort of sources. And our idea is that instead of 50 organizations sort of having to do the same research, that we can package some of that research that we've done, bring in some key speakers from these organizations in order to be able to get that information.
Become a member of the WILD community by registering for the Women in Global Development Leadership Forum happening virtually on October 26. Please visit our website www.wildleadershipforum.org to register today. And a special thank you to our sponsors.